Grabing hypocrisy. So shame on you, Alvin. Shame on you. Is Alvin Aragon a saintly husband or showing some narcissistic traits? A devoted protector or a subtle narcissistic in disguise? Christian virtue or narcissistic control? What is the point of view in this situation in a holistic way? Hi, beloved. This is Doc Gilbert, and I'm a Christian clinical counselor and psychologist. So, hi, guys. Welcome to our new episode. And this is the hot topic now here in the Philippines. And, for the foreigner viewers, wow, let me speak in Tagalog, for us, for me to be able to address, more Filipinos. So, para mas ma-educate ang mas maraming Filipino regarding this. So anyway, kamusta kayo? I know if you come across dito sa video na to and you're willing and open to learn, I know it's not an accident. And, I empathize with a lot of people who are being triggered, angry, confused, anxious, stressed, with the Alvin Aragon situation, with all his statements, using Christianism to further his agenda. Well, I don't know what his agenda, but we're gonna unpack that. But yeah, I mean, for me, it's equally stressful, to watch some videos. I did not finish the whole video, no, because well, for me, it's more than enough na makita yung portion ng videos to see the have for me to have an observation. And yeah, I'm also like setting boundary in terms of watching this kind of people making those shameful statements, attacking statements towards others, as a full-time counselor and psychologist, and I cannot like allow myself to expose with more of that. That's why, I do not like open my news feed like 80 to 90% of the time in terms of using Facebook, because that's my way to protect myself. I've been hearing a lot of people in counseling, hearing their harm done to them, the effects of that, their suffering, from this kind of antagonistic and narcissistic people. So I'm not saying that Alvin is a narcissist, which it's up to you how you're gonna conclude later, but I'm gonna have a disclaimer. But part of that is I set boundary. I'm not opening any statements, videos, that I already suspect would shame others, would be antagonistic. When I say antagonistic, ito yung mga taong like nang shame, very aggressive, sila lang yung tama, and they use like a lot of like maneuvers and control to prove their point and to manipulate people. So yeah, I mean, I do not like watching these videos, but I needed to, to give my point of view. Okay? But before that, let me promote this book. So this is the book of Dr. Ramani. It's like identifying and healing from narcissistic people. So it's really helpful for me as a therapist and also as a person, in understanding what others are going through, the impacts of that, the effects of that in the emotional, mental, and holistic way sa maraming tao. And this is very practical on how you can deal with this kind of people. Okay? And also to spot them and begin to heal. Okay? So I suggest guys you buy this book. This is very helpful. And yeah, well, in terms of my own experience of God, like being in the healing process for the past years, and I've had also my own therapy session yesterday, I still can't comprehend the depth of God's love for me, and His love for people and it's really unfathomable. Of course, I've been a Christian for a long time, and I've started healing like when I was 23 years old, and I've been healing like for the past 10 years of my life. But still, I'm still caught in awe, of this magnitude, of this grace, you know. I mean, Him seeing a lot of my brokenness more than anyone else, like 100%, but still like have this kind of love, that's really incomprehensible for me and still life changing. And yeah, it's like an experience that our mind, even my mind, cannot fully comprehend, and even our minds cannot fully comprehend. And when we talk about God, many times, especially by the narcissistic people who are religious, spiritual, quote unquote, you know, even that they use God to control people. And we're gonna dive deep into that. Okay? So, but God is not boxed with our brokenness. He is not intimidated with that. He invites us to go deeper with Him, to allow Him to enter in those shameful and broken parts in our lives. And of course, talking about free will, God cannot like force anything sa atin. Okay? Kung di tayo willing na tignan yung brokenness natin, which is very true for narcissistic people, then God will not force Himself. He respects our boundary. He respects our belief. He respects who we are, where we are, ng season ng buhay natin, nasan tayo, mentally, emotionally, physically, sexually, relationally, and He will not condemn us. But with the religious, narcissistic people, um, they use it like a way to shame, to control, to make others feel inferior, less, that they are the better ones. But yeah, we're gonna talk more about that. Okay, trigger warning for those who will watch this. I know that you're gonna be exposed to stress. So please, you have the will, you're empowered to stop this video and pause and breathe, and even like I hope you have your own support system, to process what are we gonna talk about, and actually my hope is that people who are stuck in an abusive and narcissistic cycle in their lives, whether it's in the church, in their own families, in their own romantic partners, or spouses. I hope that you'll find the help that you need. You'll find the healing that you need. And maybe this is the start. Ako personally, I believe that God uses this to expose a lot of hearts and to bring into light what is the truth, regarding this situation. So, yeah, trigger warning. We're going to be talking about trauma, its impact, its effects, the stress behind this. And yeah, I hope that you'll have the care. You're going to take care of yourself. Okay? So, what am I gonna I'm gonna talk about in this video is purely an educational purpose. I'm not gonna diagnose Alvin. I'm gonna present the symptoms, the characteristics. It's up to you to form your own opinion. This is part of the process of helping people develop critical thinking, meaning, yung pag nilay-nilayan mo, pag-isipan mo, upuan mo, ano ba ang tama at mali, ano bang nangyayari, to reflect upon that. It's more of engaging the prefrontal cortex. Ito yan, dito yan sa part ng brain natin. And for you to be able to think. Okay? And, whatever I'm gonna say here, it's my opinion. Okay? I'm allowed to have my own opinion. I'm gonna share my experiences, thoughts and feelings. It's alleged, meaning it's tentative. Maybe it's true, maybe it's not. It's up to you. Okay. But yeah, first I'm gonna speak as a survivor of narcissistic system. I've experienced a lot of that kind of abuse and power play and control, from my own family. My biological father is actually a narcissist. He is a malignant narcissist. And yeah, like in my experience of the church, of a school, of a company, of the system that enables this narcissistic cycle. And even when we look at in the world at large, here in the Philippines, hindi na tayo lalayo. Whether evangelical churches, Christian man yan o hindi, politics, communities, showbiz, schools, there is and there are narcissistic people. There is narcissistic system. At kapag sinabi kong narcissistic system, it means that may mga taong nag-aalaw sa mga taong ito to manipulate, abuse, control, deceive people, gaslight, and they do not have accountability. They go on with their lives abusing more people. And what's really bothering here is that psychological abuse is not like really highlighted sa Philippine law. It's in the law, but you do not know anyone na nakulong dahil na psychological abuse sila. You know? And there is an epidemic of narcissism here in the Philippines. I'm gonna say that confidently there is. And of course, I understand that the church, the system here, they are not ready to face that. But I'm gonna voice that out. Okay? And for me, I've witnessed a lot of people being harmed by this kind of people, especially with Christian narcissistic people, religious people clothed in this like moral, spiritual supremacy. And I've witnessed that, in my counselees, in the people that I disciple, in our ministry here at Tanza Cavite, parents that are narcissistic, and even with the harm that they've done, they do not have the accountability. They go on with their lives, but still continuously abusing their victims. I remember this counselor of mine na adult na siya, and this person lives with the narcissistic parents, and the verbal and psychological abuse continues even up until today. So imagine, no wonder, this person suffers with mental disorders like physical health problems. So I've witnessed far too much, harm that was being done to a lot of people. And even when we look at the ACE, the adverse childhood experiences, so ito yung research about trauma and its impact to the physical health, which is here in the Philippines, it's not yet acknowledged, na yung trauma actually is a major factor of diseases, illnesses, cancers. Because like, of course, I'm not gonna go into details with that, but trauma inflames the organs. Namamaga yung mga organs due to the unresolved trauma. And yung pamamaga ng organs na yun are all like present with the physical health problems. So, and I've heard and I've witnessed a lot of people suffers, with anxiety, with depression, with PTSD, with sexuality, with sexual addiction, with relationships, with attachment styles that are insecure, coming from their own experiences of narcissism. Sadly, sa mga magulang nila, mga church leaders nila along the way, which, that will be triggered, ng mga church leaders and narcissists, itong mga parental wounds from the narcissistic parents. Okay? So, it has to stop. I know that even in the Bible, it says that the days will become more wicked, pasama ng pasama, patindi ng patindi yung kasamaan dito sa mundo. So, I do not expect that this narcissistic epidemic would stop. It will actually propagate. It will continue. But I hope by doing this, people would begin to open their eyes. Those who are willing, those who are open. And I'm not gonna diagnose Alvin here. It's not my client. I like what Dr. Ramani explained na um, the diagnostic and statistical manual that we are using, in assessing and diagnosing mental and personality disorders. Dr. Ramani said na it's in a way inaccurate in terms of diagnosing narcissistic personality disorders because like hindi naman lahat ng tao nagpapadiagnose. And with this kind of people, hindi talaga yan sila magpapadiagnose. Okay? So, and that's why I like that point of view with Dr. Ramani, the narcissistic expert worldwide. No, na, of course, like I'm not gonna use diagnosis and it's up to you, okay? How you're gonna see it. But I'm gonna like share my thoughts, views, based on my experience. And, I will use my voice to shed light and debunk these lies and manipulation, using Christianity in vain. Okay? So, yes, I agree that the public shaming and ridicule that Alvin is experiencing, mali yun, but what he is doing is evil and wrong. Pushing many people away from God, due to his lack of self-awareness, distorted beliefs, wrong theology. You are wrong, Alvin. You are wrong. And and because you did that publicly and you're not stopping, you must be called out publicly too. Okay? And this is the catch, even before like uh filming this, there were a few like being triggered me posting about Alvin, I'm gonna like do a deep dive and saying they care, they're concerned, and some like challenging my theology. Well, part of that is I set boundary. I did not, engage much with that. But, you know, here in the narcissistic system, uh, people like them, the abusers, the narcissistic people, the legalistic, especially, with the abusers and narcissistic people, they don't like victims or survivors to speak. And they use all their power, gossip, manipulation to silence them, to stop them from speaking. And, well, good news, I'm not gonna stop speaking. You're not gonna silence me. Okay? So, disclaimer, of course, ang nag-trending kasi is yung pinag-resign ako ni Lord na, picture. And for me, like, I want to say I honor and respect my co-ministers. I myself, we are in full-time mission, in we are in full-time ministry, and I believe it's not about that. I believe that God called us where we are in his specific, time and place for us to bring us, into a place where he can use us mightily, just like how he called me in full-time ministry, how he called me here, in becoming a counselor and psychologist. But, God did not do it in a controlling manner, in a demanding manner. The tone, the manner, the way that God said it, it's not in aggressive mode, which is the way Alvin said that, very aggressive, very domineering. That's my opinion. And, but, God invites us, like for me, he invites me, to enter into this calling where I'm going to experience him more. But I do have the choice to reject that or not. Okay? Because I have my own free will. God respects our free will. That's why, the prodigal son story, even if the prodigal son wreck his life, mess up, run away and rebel against the father did not stop him because, that is boundary. God honors our free will. He honors our boundary. That is respect. And he cannot bypass that. It is our choice as a human being of to what are we gonna do with our will. Okay. Second, it's not about boxing someone on his or her vulnerability, issues, or weaknesses. So it's not also about invalidating trauma or invalidating what made him like that, bago ko makalimutan, with those people who are abused by narcissistic people, those victims and survivors, one of the weaknesses, although hindi naman dapat talaga siya weakness, but one of the ways that the narcissistic people use against these people are their empathy. Yung okay, magbabago naman siya. Okay, ito yung pinanggagalingan niya. Okay, like, masakit yung pinagdaanan niya. Okay, forgive him. Let's restore. I'm gonna restore my trust. And I tell you, like, narcissistic people take advantage of empathy. Okay? So it's not about that. We all have our own trauma, which are, coming from the effects of sin. But, when trauma is unresolved, it becomes part of our personality, and overall well being. We have the choice, we have the agency and responsibility to heal and grow from our trauma. Okay? We still have our own choices. So it's not about that. It's not about also limiting change and healing and wholeness for Alvin. I hope that he would find that in his heart to be self-aware. Although I doubt that. That's my opinion. As of the moment, he continues to be interviewed. He is not stopping. He is enjoying the limelight, being morally superior. That's my opinion. But, it's not about that. I hope that, maybe someday he would wake up and find help. But, I desire healing for all. I desire healing for him, but in reality, few percentages of those narcissistic people, well, I'm not concluding that he is, but in my opinion, he is. Okay. Um, but very few are open to change, to look at this issue in their lives, in their hearts, because that is full of shame, you know, to look at their vulnerabilities, when I talk about in general narcissistic people, to look at their vulnerabilities is, is to die in oneself. Like, they don't have a sense of self. Like, imagine a balloon na walang laman. Pag pinutok mo, walang laman. Ganun ang mga taong, narcissistic. They don't have a sense of self. And ang laman nun is shame. And when they try to look at their, issues, vulnerabilities, weaknesses, they're gonna look at their shame, and then they're not gonna survive. They believe that they're not gonna survive, and they don't want that. And that's the reason why very few people who are narcissists, in really would ask for help. Okay, so it's not about questioning his salvation or his relationship with God. Only God fully knows that. Okay? I'm not gonna unpack his history, diagnose that, analyze that. We don't have time for that. Although I can do that, but I'm not gonna do that. I'm gonna explain the discognition, like yung thought patterns niya, yung pag-iisip, and the behavior, the psychology behind it, the unconscious emotion regarding it, the needs behind it. Okay? And also, marami nating disclaimer, calling out narcissist characteristics and symptoms do not equate that I and other people are better than him. Okay? Lahat tayo may kahinaan. We are all working in progress. But when we talk about narcissistic people like this in a like nationwide level, it brings more harm to a lot of people who are not aware, who are not educated, and that is like being taken advantage and plus combined with the power of religious beliefs, which is Christianism. And it is very dangerous. Okay? So, the debate, burst out, whether he is right or wrong, actually creating a lot of confusion, doubts, questions about the gift of Christianity. And actually, in reality, it led more people hate Christianity. Of course, God, we don't need to defend God. God can handle himself. But it's getting away, pushing what the gospel really wants to do in, someone's life. It is harmful. What he is doing is harmful. Okay? And it's very dangerous because I've witnessed it in my counseling. That using Christian beliefs for, like, for example, a partner or a spouse or a friend or like a member of the church, uh, using these Christian beliefs to control them to stay in the relationship, even if it is already abusive, is really dangerous. It does not come from God. Okay? So I've witnessed that, how they were blinded, how they were stuck in the love bombing cycle, the trauma bond cycle where, the narcissist would love bomb, meaning bibigyan niyo mga gusto mo, papuri, gifts, time, and then later on, isi-shame ka niya, i-ignore ka niya, you know, i-dismiss ka niya, invalidate ka niya, and then later, then love bombing phase would enter again. Like, bibigyan niya ulit yung gusto mo, and so forth, and so forth. And so, that's why it becomes addictive for many, and they become stuck with this narcissistic cycle, or the trauma bond. Okay? So this video is for awareness of these kinds of characteristics and traits. Again, it's up to you kung ano yung opinion mo, ano yung mahihinuwa mo, your insight, your reflection regarding this. It's up to you. But yeah, I hope that those who are open, would come to see this. Okay? And those who were harmed by Alvin's statement and became confused about God, yung pagmamahal ni Lord for them, yung compassion, yung grace. I hope you would see this and know that Alvin is not equated to God. It is his own beliefs, trauma, personality. It's him, not God. Okay? So, and this is hard to swallow for many Christian churches that, narcissistic people do exist, in Christian evangelical churches far more than what I and us can imagine. And I've witnessed that, heard that from, for the past 10 years of my counseling and for the past years of my life as a survivor myself. Okay? So, yeah, I mean, of course, I've handled some narcissists in my counseling, pero hindi sila nagtagal in counseling. So yeah, that's it. And in relation to that, by the way, guys, I'm gonna like summarize this para kung gusto niyo i-shortcut, I can do that. But I suggest that you continue to watch this because every like discussion builds up, from one to another. Okay? So why many Christians do not see this kind of toxicity? Okay? And I hope that this reality, this truth would be unveiled to many people. And the reason why is the psychological defense of idealization and devaluation. So lahat ng tao merong psychological defenses. So dito na like I'm gonna be Dr. Gilbert. It's not my opinion. And yeah, like idealization and devaluation is a way we protect ourselves from the trauma, especially from our caregivers, in order for us to survive. For example, like yung anak, it's hard for us, like for a kid, for a child to see yung parents sila abusive. Like, nananakit, nambubugbog, or, absent, abandoned them, neglected them, or like, beat their like mothers, or iniwan, nag-ibang pamilya. Okay? So, any form of hurt and abuse, hindi kayang tignan nyo ng bata as of that moment. Wala siyang capacity to handle that because hindi siya magso-survive mentally, emotionally, physically, So, and it's also because of the symbiosis, kapag kapanganak sa isang bata, mayroong natural love ang anak para sa nanay at sa magulang. That's what you call symbiosis. So it's really confusing, na how can my own parent abuse me, hurt me, if he or she supposed to love me, right? So, hindi yon maarok ng isip ng isang bata. Hindi niya yon ma-analyze. Hindi niya yon kayang i-regulate. Hindi niya yon kayang i-handle on his own. Okay? So, and kapag nakita niya yung totoong abuse na ginawa ng parents niya, then he or her gonna lose itong relationship na meron siya, thus losing yung sarili niya. Gets nyo? So, to lose the relationship of a kid sa parents niya, hindi lang niya mawawala yung relationship, but mawawala din yung sarili niya. Okay? And kapag nawala yung sarili niya, of course, mababaliw siya. So, yeah, I mean, that's why there is idealization, meaning pinipili unconsciously, meaning hindi aware yung bata, na tignan lang yung mabuting aspect sa magulang niya, even though it's already abusive. Okay? At kahit walang mabuting aspect, the child can, idealize. Kahit walang mabuti, kahit abusive, kahit toxic, because of this defense, makikita ng bata, ito yung mabuti. The child can create that kind of fantasy, be in the fantasy land, to see that. Okay? And thus, dahil na-create niya yung idealization na yon, pero saan niya ilalagay yung galit niya? Sa parents niya. So, dalawa yon. Okay? Either ibabato niya sa ibang tao, which this is what's happening. Those people na who are calling out Alvin, yung galit nila, tinatapon nila dun sa mga nag-hate kay Alvin. Okay? That's what you call projection or displacement naman. Or either dadalhin niya yung galit at i-project niya, i-aalaw niya sa sarili niya. Magagalit siya sa sarili niya. That's what you call devaluation. Like, nade-devalue niya yung sarili niya. Okay, kaya ako in-abuse because I'm wrong. Okay, so that's the idealization and devaluation. And the same is true, like, when I call out Alvin, then I must be wrong. Okay, so, this idealization and devaluation is very common, for many people, from a child na naging anak ka. Common na to, itong psychological defense, Unless like, there would be healing from these parental wounds. There would be no healing if, hindi to ma-address tong psychological defenses na to. And that's why, I really deal with it in my counseling, as we go deeper in our relationship, in our work together, I deal with this idealization that, you're not acknowledging your anger towards your parents because like you don't want to lose the relationship. There's guilt that maybe you're a bad kid, and well, these are the effects, the beliefs that the child carry, from toxic and abusive family, that when they acknowledge their anger towards their parents, then it would mean that they are bad kids. Okay? And they need to survive. I always say, you need to survive. You need to protect your relationship, because to lose that image of a good parent, even though they are abusive, is to lose yourself. So, there's a lot of trauma and grief work there. Grief, to process, like, i-grieve nila, ipagluksa nila yung ideal and good parent na hindi sila nagkaroon. And that's a huge loss. It takes time. It takes a lot of process. And, that's why even in years in therapy, for many counselees, may mga layers at layers talagang lalabas. And even like, kapag naging parent na ang isang tao, may mga layers na lalabas when you see your own kid, like a 17-year-old self, maaalala mo yung nawalang parent ng 17-year-old ka. Okay? So, and that's why for many Christians, like Alvin, like the pastor or Christian leader or the hero, who is speaking this so-called truth, well, yeah, totoo naman yung mga sinasabi niya. Jesus died for us. He loves us, blah, blah, blah. But they cannot see, the manipulation, the control, the shaming na ginagawa ni Alvin because of this psychological defense. Because to see that is to be confronted on how their own parents abuse them. Okay? So it's always inevitable. Hindi yun matatanggal. Unless, when we begin to process where is this idealization started, then we would begin to see, others, like figures, like parental figures. Authority figures are actually, in a way, parental figures. Okay? So, it must be processed. Maybe the beginning of healing for many, like for my counselee, for them to see na they're using idealization. Because they want to protect their relationship sa parents sila. Okay? And in reality, guys, when we look at the Gospels, Jesus actually did warn for, against Christians who are telling us that they are sheep, but, they are wolves in sheep clothing. And then many times he confronted these religious people who are bringing many people astray from God, like pushing them away, shaming them for not meeting the standard, for not being like them. And that's why Jesus confronted them, because they were publicly shaming these people away from God. So it must be confronted publicly. This guilt, this shame, not achieving that kind of standards to make them feel superior, for these religious people. Jesus publicly confronted them. And they use spiritual beliefs to control, to assert their power over the people, and they use that, by saying ito yung tama, ito yung sinabi sa Bible, and when you did not obey them, not really obeying God, of course, it's important to obey God, but if you do not obey them, you are wrong. There must be something wrong with you, and you feel ashamed, you feel guilty, and then you submit, to what they want. And that's, how they use control and manipulation. And that's why, like, Jesus actually called them whitewashed tombs, like brood of vipers, mga ulupong, and he really exposed these people with the manipulations, the deceptions that they're doing against the people of God. Okay? So, it is also necessary to call out abusive and toxic people in public. And, this Alvin Aragon's, shenanigans, outrage, it is very public. And, given the fact that they use publicity to use their agendas and not have accountability sa mga ginagawa nila, and saying a lot that makes others like offended. He was using others' names, calling them wrong, not knowing their context, shaming them, and brought a lot of anger, confusion, doubts, twisting Bible verses to feed one's ego and one's superiority. Well, that's not passion for, in sharing the gospel. In my opinion, that's purely toxic, narcissistic behavior. Okay? That's my opinion. So, yeah, let's dive deep into one of the videos that I've listened to and did my own commentary. Okay, so let's start. Of course, I'm not gonna able to analyze all parts of the videos. I don't want to further hear his statements. Actually, um, it's cringy, it's shaming, you know. But like certain clips showed already, the things I need to say. Okay, let me put it here.
Na gobyerno. Sa isang gobyerno, merong head. Ang babae, sabi sa Bible, the wives must submit to the husband.
Mm-hmm.
Ang mga anak, dapat din, they obey their parents.
Correct. Hindi pa pwede magka-level.
Hindi pwede. Kasi kung walang subordination na mangyayari, magulo ang pamilya. Sino magli-lead? Yung anak? Minsan, nangunguna pala desisyon yung anak
Bakit? Nga naman.
Mature ba yun? Marami bang experience yun? Kung yung asawa, hindi. Inayos ng Diyos ang family. Ang lalaki ang head. Sino ang leader ng lalaki? Di ang Panginoon. Kaya it's very important that the husbands must read the Word of God. It is the Lord Jesus who will lead the husband. Kapag yan, nilid ng Panginoon, magdidesisyon yan. Papaalam niya sa asawa niya. Ngayon, may wisdom ang mga babae. Han, okay yan. Pero ano kaya ito? Nag-uusap yung mag-asawa.
Oo, correct.
Tapos, at the end of the day, maganda wisdom mo, Han. Sige, ito ang desisyon ko. Then the wives must submit and the children will follow.
Ayun ang maganda.
In every right decision ng isang husband, apektado ang asawa at saka mga anak. Sa wrong decision, apektado din ang asawa at mga bata. Example, you committed adultery. Akala mo, ang maaapektuhan ikaw lang, pati asawa mo, pati mga anak mo. If you do what is right, pleasing sa Panginoon, may blessing yun.
Ayun.
May reward yun.
Tama.
Ibe-bless ka rin ni Lord, asawang babae at mga bata. Ganun ang patakaran ng Diyos sa Bible.
Kaya yun dapat sundin, Alvin.
Kung bakit si Izzy, ito kasi nag-trending yung umakyat.
Okay, well, yeah, this is the first part ng video na pinanood natin. Well, I give him that, he's speaking like truths, about God, assigning leadership to the husband, God blessing us, as we obey Him, follow Him. But, of course, it's not always the case because, like, it's not dependent, if we fully obey God, there would be no suffering, there would be no trauma, and that's very actually, clear sa story ni Job. Kaya nga, itong tatlong kaibigan niya na nagbigay ng bad counsel na baka may kasalanan ka kaya ipinagdaanan mo to lahat ng to, okay? So it's not always the case, but of course, like obeying the parents, really submitting to God's authority, Jesus' authority as, the head of the family, obey the impact of sin, to the wives, to the children, to the family. That's, very true. Okay? But meron akong kailangan i-debunk dito. Okay? So, yung mga term na binanggit niya na the wives must submit to the husband, they obey their parents, nag-usap kayo mag-asawa, ito yung decision ko, Alvin, and the wife and children must follow. Okay. So, tingnan muna natin in a theological sense. Okay? First, we need to understand that ang marriage is a collaborative leadership. Okay? Ito yung biblical model. It's a covenant partnership. Yung sinabi nga sa Genesis 2:24 describes husband and wife becoming one flesh. Okay? So it's not just the husband but it's the wife. They become one flesh, one person, one government. So it's not like ultimately yung husband lang yung magdedesisyon. So oneness implies shared life, shared responsibility, and shared decision making. Okay? So kung ikaw isang tao ka, magde-decision ka, single ka, for example, hindi ka naman makapag-decision na, okay, nakadepende pa sa ibang tao. Yung decision mo is your own decision. So imagine that like, as one flesh, the husband and wife. So decisions both affect both and should involve both. Okay? It should involve the wife. Okay? Headship is loving leadership. It's not domination. Okay? So in Ephesians 5:23 to 25, so dito frame ni Christ yung leadership, by modeling it as sacrificial, nurturing, and protective. Yung leadership ni Christ actually listens, nurtures, serves, values others. So when an authority without love, when it becomes without love, then it becomes control. Okay? So biblical leadership empowers. Okay? And then mutual submission is actually foundational. Okay? Yan, sinabi yan sa Ephesians 5:21. It calls the believers to submit to one another. So healthy marriages actually practice mutual respect and consideration. It's not the husband per se kung anong gusto niya or tingin niyang tama. It has, it needs to have mutual submission. Submission is not silence, meaning the wife must speak her needs, her thoughts, her decision, and they must come to a collaborative agreement, and it is voluntary and grounded in love. And that's why, hindi naman binanggit din dito ni Alvin yung kasunod nung husband, the wives must submit to the husband, but also, the husband must love the church, the wife, just as Christ loves the church. So, hindi niya yung binanggit masyado, but yung loop na yon, it shows that it is in mutuality. Okay? The wife will be able to submit to a husband that loves her. It's in the loop. It's not like one line. Okay? So that's why there is no higher superior level na mas mataas yung husband. They are equal. Okay? O doon din tayo doon ka rin mapapaisip na may misogynism, quote and quote dito, no? It's up to you, okay, kung paano mo yung titignan. So both husband and wife are created in God's image. Genesis 1:27. Ayan, kung mga Bible verses lang gusto nyo. Both possess wisdom, gifts, and spiritual insight. Okay? So collaboration honors the dignity and calling of both. Okay? So agreement is the goal, not control. So ang healthy leadership actually seeks unity, not unilateral power. The final decisions, when difficult, of course, it must be reflected, prayed upon. It has to have consensus building. It has to be processed, talk about. Okay? But a Christ-centered marriage prioritizes harmony over ego. Okay? So, in my opinion, the way he is saying it's not passion. It's ego-driven point of view, the way he asserts that, the dominance, if you're not gonna agree with him, you're wrong. The nuances, meaning how he uses body language, his tone, his words. Okay? So, key takeaway dito, biblical leadership in marriage is not about the husband making all decisions, but it's about leading through love, humility, and collaboration, reflecting Christ's heart and wisdom. Okay? So it's an incomplete theology. May mga maganda siyang sinabi, but it's an incomplete theology. Incomplete theology as well, that how he was shaming the kids. They just, must submit to the parent, not even having empathy, helping them share their thoughts and feelings, and the parents should hear them connect with them. It's not like, oh, there, you just submit. You just like follow and obey. That's incorrect theology. Sinabi din yan sa Bible, do not exasperate your children. Okay? So, well, this part, the manner Alvin is saying this, with incomplete and incorrect theology, without sound psychology regarding marriage and parenting, in my opinion, it could be a form of domination. And the way he was asserting his, beliefs, like it could be, in my opinion, a form of domination and control. Okay? So and that's very dangerous, for many wives who are under narcissistic, abusive relationships. I'm not saying they are, si Alvin tsaka si Izzy. But in reality, there are a lot of wives, partners, that are stuck, and even like church members, children who are like, oh, Christian ka, kailangan mo patawarin magulang mo, with a continuing abuse, just, anyway, it's really dangerous, It will further abuse, manipulation, deception that is gonna take toll in one's mental health. Okay, so let's continue. So ito na yung about sa pag-show up ni Izzy sa concert.
Siya sa stage. Aakyat lang sa stage.
Yun yung nababasa sa comment.
Oo, aakyat lang sa stage. Kailangan pa ipag-pray. Tapos sinasabi nila, controlling ako. Pala desisyon ako ang boss. Hindi, may gobyerno kasi sa family. The husband must take the lead. And ang leader ng husband, ang Panginoong Jesus. And I read the word. And I see, actually, nire-respeto niya yung leadership ng husband. Lahat ng babae dapat ganun. Dito sa bansa natin.
Kaya parang
sa ibang bansa.
Sa masasabi natin, parang napakaganda na nga harmonious yung pagkasama ng family niya because of the mini government.
Sinasabi nila, kaya pala wala sa concert si IC dahil dyan sa lalaking yan eh. Teka lang matagal lang wala si IC sa Sexbomb, 2009 pa lang.
Bago pa ikaw dumating.
Hindi pa nga ako yung asawa eh. Sino ang nagpa-resign sa sa Sexbomb? Ang Panginoon nung naging Christian si IZ. Pinaresign ng Lord. Sabi ni Lord kay IC, come follow me, I will make you fishers of men. Nag-obey si IC doon. Sabi ni IC, yung pangalan po namin, yung damit po namin, at yung sayaw namin. I-explain ko, ano bang mali sa pangalan? Sexbomb. Ano ba yung sex?
Yeah, let's take a moment. In my opinion, like, he has an issue of misogynism, hatred to women, yeah, well, again, makikita natin, how he used the word government multiple times as a leader, as led by God, reading the Bible, asserting unquestionable leadership. That's what it is, okay? He is asserting that. Okay, but tingnan natin, ano ba ang reality in terms of biblical leadership or the government per se. Okay? So, and even combining it with psychology, yeah, well, using that, it's like weaponizing headship to silence one's voice para hindi magsalita. Okay? Sa halimbawa, ang isang tao na narcissistic, when they use and quote verses to, for them to submit while ignoring mutual submission, meaning you like being considerate, empathetic, willing to like consider your partner's feelings or someone else's experiences and have sacrificial love, well, that's weaponizing headship. That's weaponizing Bible verses, weaponizing your religious beliefs. Okay? And dito parang nire-reframe niya yung disagreement niya that it's, a rebellion or sin already. Kapag hindi mo sinunod yung leadership niya or being led by God, it's, shutting down healthy dialoguing. regarding this topic. And, actually this distorts biblical leadership into an authoritarian control. Okay? Rather than Christ-like service. Okay? So, bakit ang powerful ng paggamit ng mga Bible verses? Kasi like, it carries spiritual authority, so misusing it can feel like you're disobeying God and not him, like not Alvin. If you don't believe in him, you're disobeying God and you do not believe in God, which is yeah, of course, you're gonna feel shame and guilt about that. So there is also spiritual guilt and fear-based control here. Somehow may implication dito na questioning him equals to questioning God's will. Okay? So na-frame siya as God told me, of course, which remove a space for discernment and shared prayer, to analyze that, to take a look and reflect sa mga statements niya. Of course, I do not question the authority and truths of the Bible, the scripture, which is, very wise, God spoken words. It is active and living, but the way he was doing it, he was framing it as, not to question him personally. And for anyone na makakarinig dito, like for example, for a wife or a partner, they would feel unsafe. Ida-doubt nila yung judgment and faith. And I commonly hear it, from narcissistic victims and survivors sa counseling na masama ba akong asawa, masama ba akong anak, masama ba akong Christian. They doubt their judgment and faith. And because there is a lot of gaslighting from narcissistic people. And when I say gaslighting, it's distorting yung reality na hindi yan nangyari. Mali ang sinasabi mo. Hindi ko ginawa yan. Ito yung sinabi ni Lord. Like, distorting your experience as wrong as untrue. Okay? And it's so powerful kasi, nalilink yung pagsunod, yung compliance into righteousness. At kapag di ka naniwala, di ka sumunod sa Kanya, then it's a spiritual failure which creates fear. Fear, very with the advanced trauma training that I've had, very common ang paggamit ng takot, in building cult, in building gang or syndicate, to control people with fear. With cult, like religious cults, they use fear, a lot. Christian narcissists use fear a lot, those who are in the position. Okay? So here also, it's using religion to maintain image and power. Okay? So, si Alvin, in my opinion, he's publicly portraying himself mature, while belittling, dismissing, and validating others' feelings. Of course, the gospel would offend, us in our sin, but it does not condemn, yeah, I mean, when Jesus reached out to, the tax collectors, Zacchaeus, he did not say, ganito ka, ganyan ka, para kang hayop, mas masahol ka pa sa hayop, because that's how they see tax collectors during that time. He went to his home and spent time with Zacchaeus. And, spending time eating with him, Jesus eating with him, is the most intimate tradition among Jewish culture. Kapag kumain ka sa loob ng isang bahay, magkakasama kayo, that's the most intimate for them. And yeah, Jesus did not condemn him. But see here, the manner is about, I'm right, you're wrong. Yun yung manner ni Alvin dito. Okay? So you just need to submit more. Okay? And dito I remember I'm gonna put the picture, yung interview ni Boy Abunda with Izzy, kitang-kita na may grief si Izzy, missing her co-stars. But, there was no empathy kay Alvin. Okay? So, mapaisip ka na lang. So, why it's powerful, using, doctrines like verses, because faith is central to our identity. We are here in the Philippines as a Christian nation, Catholics, evangelicals, and when manipulation is spiritualized, it affects yung autonomy, not just our autonomy, but even how we view God and our self-worth, our self-identity. It puts a lot of shame. And shame says there's something wrong with you. You're evil, you're wrong, you're sinful. Of course, we are all sinful, but it's in a toxic shame loop. Okay? That's what the impact of what he's doing. So, key insight, spiritual leadership reflects Christ, who protects, listens, and sacrifices. Jesus is not actually a narcissistic leader kasi, you know, he sacrificed himself. He allowed himself to die on the cross and not selfishly, use his power just to prove himself sa mga tao na he's God. He did not do that. Like, he has that full maturity to hold himself, and really, really like allow himself to be vulnerable. And, with narcissistic people, it's all about their needs, me. My needs are more important, my views, my feelings, and yours are not. But Jesus demonstrated otherwise. He subjected himself in humility into the death, up to the death, to the point of death on the cross. He did that. Okay? So it's, very dangerous with this platform. I believe, my opinion, he is spiritually manipulating, using spiritual scriptures, Christianism, to dominate and control. And it's actually leading many people away from God. And I hope, like, this video of mine, hindi naman to sikat, I'm not popular, but could educate and, reach out to the right people. Okay. So, continue natin to the rest of the video. I think ito na yung last part. Let me play it.
Iisipin lahat ng bata, ano yung sex? Sex is actually created by God na ginagamit ng husband and wives. Not girlfriend, boyfriend. At hindi dapat isipin ng bata agad yun.
Oh.
So, medyo, alam mo yun, iwas doon. Hindi pleasing yun. Hindi maganda impluwensya sa mga ibang maraming tao sa Pilipinas, sa mga bata especially. Kasi hindi pa time para isipin nila yung sex kasi bata pa sila. Second, yung damit.
Yan.
Okay, so dito, ini-imply naman ni Alvin that reading sex, like the sex bomb, is like, would be equated sa mga bata having sex with boyfriend and girlfriend. Okay? So what's happening here, he's making the conversation conclusive and not collaborative. Okay, it's like end of the discussion. This is God's order. And sex equals like you're having sex. So dapat sa marriage lang. Of course, that's true. So it shifts from dialoguing to an immediate declaration. Okay, he positions himself as the final spiritual authority in this relationship. Okay, by saying that. Okay, it also strengthens control by spiritualizing the outcome. So dito, kapag inaccept mo yung conclusion niya, like, for example, this like mere fact about using the sex term, it's obeying God. If you do not, then you're disobey God. Well, sex in its term, it's not shameful. It must be taught among the children. And even the word sex, dahil nga there's so much shame, if there is like one area that has so much shame, it's sex, it's in sexuality. So like, even the name sex bomb, it is taken out of context that it has already full of shame. But it's based on one's perception, on how will you see that. Okay? Because for me, I do not know kung ano man yung motivation ng gumawa nito, ng pangalang sex bomb. But for me, I do not see any malice with that, the word sex bomb. Okay? So it suggests, if you resist that belief, you are rebelling not sa kanya, kay Alvin, but actually kay God. And it creates spiritual pressure that silence, healthy questioning, to discuss more. What about that? So, may tinatawag din tayo dyan, in terms of psychological defenses. It's called negative interpretation bias, kung saan, ini-interpret ang isang bagay na dapat neutral or ambiguous as already negative. Like, sex equates to children teaching children na makipag-sex na kahit boyfriend at girlfriend pa lang. Well, wala naman dong sinabi, right? So it's his perception. It's jumping to conclusion. Making a negative judgment without actually sufficient evidence. So what's your evidence sa kapag binasa mo yung sex bomb is already teaching, sex, boyfriend at girlfriend sa mga bata. And by the way, just for you to know, I'm teaching our adoptive kid, and the people that I'm discipling about like healthy sexuality, sex education in a biblical way. Okay? So tama yung sinasabi niya, but the way he was saying it, like there's a lot of bias, and projection. So, kapag hindi ka naniwala, okay, dito sa sinasabi niya, shame on you. So, it involves attributing one's own negative traits or fears to others. So, may projection, meaning people who are actually, struggling and who are narcissistic people have a lot of shame. And they try to project it to others. That's why, the way he was saying his statement, although it's up to you kung maniniwala kang narcissist siya or not. It's tentative. I'm not saying it as an absolute truth. But, he was shaming a lot of people, with his belief. And that's a form of projection because he has a lot of shame. That's how a lot of narcissists, project their own shame. Okay, so ituloy natin yung last part na ba ito nung record ko? Yes. Sa last part ng video, let me play this.
Damit kasing gagalangin ka. Pero may damit nakita yung cleavage mo at saka legs. Walang lalaking magnanasa kung maayos ka manamit. Maraming lalaki gusto makakita ng cleavage tsaka legs eh. Kahit naka-see-through ka pa. Oh, anong sabi ni Jesus? If you look lustfully at the woman, you already committed adultery in your heart.
So, sinasabi mo, yung mga...
Tignan mo pala ng babae na nagnanasa ka, parang ginawa mo na yung physical act. Ano pa? Sayaw. Merong wholesome na sayaw, merong sayaw na seducing. Sige, sumayaw ka ng seducing. Ano mararamdaman ng lalaki pag may sumasayaw na seducing ang atake? Pag wholesome, maayos naman
masaya lang,
masaya lang eh. Di ba? Pero pag seducing, naku, iba nararamdaman natin. Alam nyo yan, men. Alam nyo yan, mga lalaki. So, umiwas si Izzy dun. Bakit? Yun ang will ni Lord eh.
Kaya matagal na. Ibig sabihin, sobrang tagal na kung
matagal nang wala si Izzy. Huwag mo kong sisihin na dahil sa akin. Kaya wala siya sa concert.
Okay. Nakaka-speechless. But, yeah, dito, yung argument ni Alvin, yung argument niya ay gagalangin ka kapag maayos kang manamit. So, therefore, kung di ka maayos manamit sa mga babae, it's like, okay lang na bastusin ka. There's no other way but to see that, kind of logic. So, kailangan maayos ka magdamit equals to irerespeto ka. Kung hindi ka maayos manamit, equals to babastusin ka. Equals to like, okay, pag nanasaan ka ng mga lalaki. And please, Alvin, wag mo akong idamay. Kasi like, all men daw eh. Men, alam nyo yan. Yeah, just speak for yourself. Okay? So anyway, let's see what's happening here. No? There's actually spiritual blame shifting. And that's, how many narcissists, again, my opinion, whether Alvin is a narcissist or not, but I don't know, kayo nang bahala, but, this way ng ginamit niya is actually spiritual blame shifting. And, this kind of control is trying to be justified using morality. Okay? So first, shifting responsibility for sin, yung kasalanan, onto woman. Okay, so dito like Alvin was implying na kapag pinagnasaan, may misconduct, may disrespect, ay dahil yon kung paano manamit ang isang babae. So here, nire-reframe ni Alvin na yung self-control ay dependent sa babae, which is actually absurd. God has given us self-control, like free will. I mean, free will. But, there's a lot of factors why we do have self-control or not. But it's our free will. It's not dependent to what this woman would wear or not. It's dependent on you. It's your personal responsibility, Alvin. Okay? And doing that, like, it removes him and many narcissistic and toxic and abusive people from personal accountability and places moral burden sa mga babae. Like, okay, if you did this, then deserve mong ma-rape. Like I have this like victim of rape or of sexual abuse and attempted rape, where yung guardian niya sinabi sa kanya, ba't ka kasi ganyan manamit? Like, that's very inconsiderate, evil, shaming, and it removes, a personal accountability, from this pedophile, and yeah, I mean, it happens many times sa mga toxic family na kay binugbog ka, kaya ka binilyawan because ito yung nagawa mong kasalanan. And, it shifts us from thinking that discipline is equated to abuse. Like this kind of discipline is not an abuse because you've done something wrong. Okay? So very, very clear here, for me. In my opinion, yung mga beliefs niya ay coming from his own abuse, how he justifies this kind of belief. In my opinion, whatever. Anyway, so yeah, this psychological pattern is actually trying to protect someone from externalizing yung fault, okay? But many times, this kind of projection and blame shifting ay ginagawa ng mga taong ito on themselves internally or hidden or under like, inside the home na hindi nakikita ng maraming iba. Again, na maraming tao. But, it's the blame shifting that is rooted from his own shame. We shame others. We blame others because we carry that toxic shame. But to see that it's our own fault would actually be tantamount to, being powerless and helpless and vulnerable. And this kind of people do not want that. Okay? So, second, spiritualizing control through selective morality. Okay? So, dito, he uses modesty teachings to justify control regarding sa pagdamit ng babae. Okay? So, it focuses on external appearance while ignoring biblical teachings on self-control and purity of heart. Matthew 5:28. So, our desire, our responsibility, our choices are not dependent on what others would wear. Okay? In terms of like this, yung argument niya. Because we have the responsibility to learn, to maintain self-control, to practice transparency, confession, honesty of what's going on inside us. And by that way, it would help us to control our impulses. Okay? So actually, dito nire-reduce niya yung dignity ng babae dun lang kung ano yung damit niya, which is very misogynistic. In my opinion, that's very misogynistic. Okay? Um, and I'm not saying Alvin is a misogynist, but the way he said it, it's very misogynistic. Okay? Kaya I feel angry about that. And there's a lot of spiritual distortion in that way, that ang biblical verses or stand are it became a tool for dominance instead of a personal conviction. Okay? Third, it creates shame to enforce compliance. Again, ito nag-i-imply ito ng disrespect or harassment is a natural response dahil kung ano yung suot niya, ano yung present niya. So like, it's normal na ma-disrespect ka. Okay? It also suggests na kung meron kang mistreatment or abuse or rape or like you were being fantasized or whatsoever, na yung babae ay partially responsible. Of course, like, still, how we wear, our clothings, it's our responsibility. But, he tried to link it dun sa worth ng babae. Na kailangan mag-conform sa paniniwala niya. So, actually, I suspect, in my opinion, that, there's a lot of shaming that Alvin experienced sa mga significant women sa buhay niya. I think like there is trauma there, that she's trying to express it in a way that brings hatred to women. Okay? And I hope that he processed that. I hope you process that, Alvin. So yung impact nito, no, it produces guilt, confusion, internalized shame for women and for other people. Rather than ma-empower yung mga ibang tao to grow, to self-reflect, to change. Maybe kung, let's say, malaswa nga yung pananamit and, they would be gently, be led and be guided, or like help them to find their own critical thinking. Like with the teenagers, I recently learned that, as a parent, as a psychologist, you help them think, what do you think would be good for this? What would be the impact of that? What others would feel or what others would think? What would be good for you? You empower, you collaborate them, not spoon-fed them, And this is very, very shaming. And also, it avoids accountability by redefining respect. Respect, okay? So, it redefines respect as conditional, na irerespeto ka if you behave properly. Okay? Well, true biblical respect is rooted in recognizing someone's inherent integrity and dignity as made in God's image. We all have that dignity inside us. Okay? So for example, like with the toxic parents, they say, oh, you need to respect me, something like that. Well, part of the way in helping these adult children, not be stuck with that shame is to educate them that, of course, all of us needs respect. Whether you are a parent, a kid, a missionary, a pastor, or like a janitor, whatever you are, wherever you are, all of us needs respect. And it's not because you're superior, you deserve more respect. Okay? So respect is a reflection of one's character, not a reward for someone else's compliance. Hear that. Okay? So here, because you do not comply with Alvin's belief, so hindi ka karapat dapat irespeto. Okay? So, when a person shames others, nabuboost ito yung ego ng taong yun. And again, we go back in seeing na ang identity ng mga narcissist It's like a balloon without substance. So they shame others, put them down, attack, criticize, so that they would, in a way, falsely have this substance inside that I am morally superior, I'm better than you. And they falsely and ideally like get their identity from that. Okay? So without shaming, there's like a black hole inside these people. And with all these insecurities and hatred and misery, that they have inside. Okay? Well, that shows with that kind of behavior, you know. So the core insight here is healthy biblical teaching actually emphasizes personal responsibility, self-control, honoring others' dignity. Okay? At ang ginagawa ng spiritual blame shifting, it distorts, by transferring responsibility for one's behavior onto another's body or choices of clothings, which is very immature. Okay? Okay, so now we are on this part. Now, again, I'm not diagnosing Alvin, but it's up to you, if you're gonna believe my opinion and, use the symptoms and characteristics and the reality of his behavior, beliefs, actions that are causing harm to many people. So it's up to you. But there is what we call a communal narcissist. Okay? So what is a communal narcissist? So ito yung mga types ng narcissist na yung pagkuha nila ng attention, admiration, commendation, praises ay hindi lang about sa power or possession or like the money, the fame, which is very much more on the grandiose narcissist, but it's about appearing morally good, superior, perfect, like spiritually and self-sacrificing person. Okay? So regardless of Christian or not, like this is very true. Okay? So itong mga taong na to ay they present themselves as caring, righteous, generous, spiritually mature, like maybe by discussing the Bible verses or creating like external acts of charity, doing ministry, doing these things for God. And, their identity is built around by being seen as the most compassionate, most faithful, most servant-hearted. And beneath the surface, their motivation is, egocentric. They want validation because that's the way they get their, identity, their control. To be in control means to have an identity because they don't have an identity. It's a balloon, inside them. So power control equals, they would not feel helpless, powerless, insecure anymore. Of course, like I do have empathy with the trauma that enabled this kind of personality, the abuse that they've endured, that made them feel powerless as a kid, and that they need to survive. And as an adult, these people grow up as someone control addicts, power addicts, because that's the only way they know how to survive for a long time. They need to control their behaviors, their needs, their emotions. Again, I'm not diagnosing Alvin as a communal narcissist, but it's up to you. What do you believe in? What do you see? It's up to you, okay? But they crave recognition for their goodness rather than practicing humility. Okay? So, yeah, the key difference with the grandiose narcissist, which is like all fame, all power, like perfect image, but with the communal narcissist, these people boast with their virtue and morality. Okay? So, why a Christian often falls under communal narcissism? Okay? So when narcissism expresses itself through religion, it often takes a communal form because Christianity values service, morality, and spirituality. Okay? So itong mga taong ito, no, they uses faith as a platform for moral superiority. You know, that they are biblically knowledgeable, spiritually mature, uniquely anointed. You know, they gain admiration by appearing godly rather than by worldly success. You know, even though like these people will be bashed by, you know, worldly or unbeliever or not Christian, it doesn't matter for them, you know, because what they want is the praise of their own community. You know, like, for example, for Christians, the Christian community at large. Okay, so they equate disagreement to them as spiritual immaturity. Now they seek validation through spiritual identity. And also they publicly display, you know, how they pray, you know, their service, their sacrifice, like the Pharisees, you know, who publicly praise and condemn people for not doing the same. And then Jesus said, you know, what God heard is someone who is a sinner pouncing his chest for being a sinner. You know, that's what God is hearing, you know, and commending, you know, and it's subtly communicating that, you know, okay, I am more devoted compared to others. Okay, they need recognition for being the spiritual one. They mask control as spiritual leadership. So they frame this dominance and control as I am appointed by God. You know, with church trauma, I've heard that many times, you know, from narcissistic Christian leaders who control their members into this, you know, without arrest in ministry and not questioning leadership because they use this as I am anointed by God. You know, they use spiritual language to maintain authority. They appear servant like publicly, but controlling privately. Okay? So that's why, you know, it triggered outrage to many people. This Alvin, you know, issue, this his statements, you know, but praised by many Christians, defended by many Christians, which I believe, in my opinion, that's what's important to him. You know, he protect image at all costs, very high, sensitive to criticism, especially spiritual criticism. They respond defensively if their godly image is questioned. So look at how, again, it's my opinion, but look at how Alvin was explaining. You know, he sounded arrogant for me, in my opinion. His higher intonation, not backing out this tone of I'm right, you're wrong, and if you are like questioning this, you are questioning God. It does not have empathy. It does not have empathy. Okay, which is the core of what Jesus did. Okay, so they spiritualize conflict to avoid accountability, and you know, they lack and have not, you know, do not have empathy. You know, so to assert control and dominance and abuse others, there is no empathy. You know, hatred of women, there is no empathy. Condemnation, homophobia towards LGBTQ, there's no empathy. You know, shaming of others of being a Christian, there's no empathy. And that's why I like Jopai's response. I'm gonna put the picture here of what she said on her Facebook. But the key of what she said, it's about like, you know, God does not condemn. You know, he is a God of grace and mercy. He does not condemn others to push them away from him. Yes, of course, he disdains sin. Sin harms us. That's why God does not want, you know, that sin for us. But, you know, he is our prodigal father. You know, like the son, when the prodigal son messed up, and when he was coming home, he wasn't angry, he wasn't shaming, he wasn't like, oh, you did this and did that, you know, but he was running after him, embrace him, kiss him. You know, that's the very heart of our Heavenly Father. And yeah, I mean, it makes sense. Like when our trauma, our abuse experiences are unprocessed, that's gonna be your belief on Christianity or how you view God. You know, so the core insight here is a Christian narcissist is not narcissistic because they are Christian, but because narcissism has adopted religious language as its stage. Meaning, this became their coping mechanism, psychological defense mechanism, in order like to, protect them from being exposed in their own shame, to protect them from the loss of identity in order to feel secure. Ito yung naging gamit nila, naging tool nila. So, it is still a psychological defense to survive, to use religious images and mass, and to assert that kind of power and control using, wrong spiritual beliefs and wrong theological stands. It's still a way of protection in order to survive. Okay? So, I'm gonna just run through. I know mahaba na tong video na to. Thank you for staying in. And if you're new here, and if you're one of the victims of Alvin's statement, welcome here. And if you're open, I hope that this would bring healing to you and awareness. Okay, so i-run through lang natin some of the biblical warnings through Bible verses regarding communal narcissists. Okay, I know I discussed this in one of the episodes. You can look up on that, the Christian narcissist. So there's like performing goodness for public admiration in Matthew 6:1. Be careful not to practice your righteousness in front of others to be seen by them. Okay? In Matthew 6:5, when you pray, do not be like the hypocrites to be seen by others. I like that, hypocrites. Anyway, number 2, exalting self through religious status. Like in Luke 18:11-12, God, I thank you that I'm not like other people. So these are like Pharisees praying, comparing themselves morally superior against the sinners. Loving recognition and titles, like in Matthew 23:6-7, they love the place of honor and to be called rabbi by others. Okay? There's outward righteousness to inward corruption. In Matthew 23:27-28, he said, whitewashed tombs outwardly appear righteous, but inside are full of hypocrisy. Okay? Number 5, using godliness for personal gain. 1 Timothy 6:3-5, who think that godliness is a means of financial gain. Pride opposed by God, James 4:6, God opposes the proud, but gives grace to the humble. So there's a lot of verses that shows about the communal narcissist. So these verses do not label as a diagnosis, important clarification, but they describe spiritual pride, hypocrisy, and performative righteousness, which actually psychologically align, with the term communal narcissist. Okay, so before concluding this, ano ba yung distinct difference ng Christian maturity with communal narcissism? Okay, so you can read the Philippians 2-3-4, but I may summarize this. It's humility over image. A mature Christian values character formation more than public recognition. They do good things without being noticed. Okay? There is repentance over defensiveness. This person goes through the process of accountability, transparency, goes for help in counseling, process their emotional experiences and trauma. There is self-examination and self-reflection. But, and is also willing to admit their wrongdoings and apologize, without blame shifting. Okay? So third, there is mutual submission over control. Okay? So they practices Ephesians 5:21, which honors others' voices, needs, emotional experiences. They have empathy. Okay? Leaders with empathy. Leadership is collaborative, not dominating, not domineering, not control, not fear-based. Okay? There is service without spotlight. Okay? Serves because of love for God and people, not applause. not just to clout chase, using these statements for others, Christians to defend you. It finds his or her identity in uh, God's heart as a God, as God's child, and not being admired. And there is growth towards Christ likeness. Okay, this person seeks transformation, do the inner work of understanding himself, his brokenness. And mind you, all of us are broken. All of us have our own messiness, broken parts, hiddenness, sinfulness. None of us have attained perfection. We are all in the process of sanctification. So, Christian maturity, is humble enough to see that on themselves and not impose that you are perfect, you've got it all together. It measures maturity by the fruit of the Spirit, not reputation, not by, knowledge or your belief or your, change life in order to put others down. Okay? So that is Christian maturity. Okay, so in conclusion, I want to end by watching Sofia's video, which is very, very important, that we watch this. I'm gonna put it here. Let's watch it.
Sa isang interview, hindi ko nga sinabi na sinakal mo ko, di ba? Pero yun talaga yung totoong nangyari. I even choked for how many seconds bago mo tinigil yung sakal na yun. Pero nung time na yun, hindi ko pinersonal yun dahil akala ko nung time na yun, normal lang yung ganung pagdidisiplina. Pero habang lumalaki ako, mali pala talaga yun.
Grabe. Grabe yung hypocrisy. So shame on you, Alvin. Shame on you. Like I myself, as a domestic and physically abused survivor, and have witnessed and walked with a lot of, domestic violence survivors in counseling for many years, discipled many, yeah, you know, you don't have the authority to really teach this, because you are, abusive inside, and you do not take responsibility and accountability with what you did kay Sofia. Okay? That's wrong. That's evil. That's abuse. Okay? So, yeah. Well, I wish in my anger, I feel angry about what you did to her, to Sofia, but yeah, I hope you get some help. Really, it's not too late. But if you keep doing it, then shame on you. Okay, stop this kind of hypocrisy. Okay, so yeah, well, that's it. I know it's very intense, triggering. It's up to you guys on how you're gonna conclude this. Is he a narcissist? I don't know. Maybe, maybe not. But it's clear, that his behaviors, his statements are all toxic, distorted, wrong, negative, and harmful to many people. And I hope that this video could help others, for those who are willing to practice their critical thinking and to be aware and to be educated. Okay? So that's it. I hope that I want to hear your comments, learnings, insights, and if you have one, please do so. And if you know someone would benefit from this, please, share this link. And I hope to see you in our next episode. Hanggang sa muli.